Hello! It's the end of June, the middle of the year, and so I thought, and by request, I would do a physical TBR update. And if you've watched any of my recent videos, you will know that rather than reduce the number of books on my physical TBR since the beginning of this year, I have somehow managed to increase the number, even though I have currently read something like 90 books so far this year. So riddle me that one. I don't know. I started off the year with 69 books and I think I'm on something like 82 now. But anyway, like I did in the last version of this video, which I will link up there for you, I am only going to tell you the name of the book, the author, the genre and the age range, because otherwise this video will be far too long. So let us get into it. The Toymakers by Robert Dinsdale is a young adult historical fantasy. Solaris by Stanislaw Lem is classic science fiction for adults. Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman is young adult contemporary. The Lies of Lachlan Mora by Scott Lynch is adult epic fantasy. King's Cage and Warstorm by Victoria Aveyard are young adult fantasy. The City of Dreaming Books by Walter Moers is adult absurdist fantasy. The Curse of Chalion by Lois McMaster Bujold is adult fantasy. The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin is classic sci-fi for adults. The Fountains of Paradise by Arthur C. Clarke is also classic sci-fi for adults. W. Juliet by Emura is manga, and Maid Sama volumes 3 and 4 bind up is by Hiro Fujiwara and is also manga. Then I have the collection of the Girl of Fire and Thorns short stories by Ray Carson, which is young adult fantasy. The First 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North is young adult historical science fiction. Wonder Smith by Jessica Townsend is middle grade fantasy. The Book of Dust by Philip Pullman is young adult fantasy. The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern is young adult fantasy. Oh My Gods by Alexandra Shepherd is young adult fantasy but told in a contemporary style. American Royals by Catherine McGee is young adult or new adult, if we're saying that's a thing, which I don't think we are, but new adult contemporary. State of Sorrow and Song of Sorrow by Melinda Salisbury are young adult fantasy. Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo is young adult fantasy. Lost Princess by Connie Glynn is young adult but told in middle grade accessible narrative, and it kind of has a fairy tale feel, but it's actually contemporary mystery. Alex in Wonderland by Simon James Green is young adult contemporary. Birthday by Meredith Russo is also young adult contemporary. What She Found in the Woods by Josephine Angelini is young adult mystery. This Time Will Be Different by Misa Suguera is young adult contemporary but with magical realism elements, I believe. Red Sister by Mark Lawrence is adult epic fantasy. An Ember in the Ashes by Saba Tahir is young adult epic fantasy. A Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss is adult epic fantasy. A River of Royal Blood by Amanda Joy is young adult fantasy. The Demon King by Cinder Williams Chimer is young adult epic fantasy. Raw by Cora Cormack is young adult fantasy. Gardens of the Moon by Stephen Erickson is adult epic fantasy. Temeraire or His Majesty's Dragon by Naomi Novik is young adult fantasy. Spinning Silver, also by Naomi Novik and also young adult fantasy. The Giver by Lois Lowry is young adult dystopian. Pet Sematary by Stephen King is adult thriller, not quite horror, but not quite thriller either. The Tiger's Daughter and The Phoenix Empress by K. Arsenault Rivera are adult epic fantasy. Wicked As You Wish by Rin Chapeko is young adult fantasy. Steelheart by Brandon Sanderson is adult sci fantasy, so science fiction and fantasy blended together. Woven in Moonlight by Isabel Ibanez is young adult fantasy. The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand are adult literary fiction. Touch of Power by Maria V. Schneider is young adult fantasy. The Black Coats by Colleen Oakes is young adult fantasy. The Swan Book by Alexis Wright is adult dystopian. The Travelling Cat Chronicles by Hiro Arakawa and translated by Philip Gabriel is adult contemporary but told from the perspective of a cat. So, magical realism? I don't know. The Light Between Worlds by Laura Weymouth is young adult historical fiction with portal fantasy. Into the Crooked Place by Alexandra Christo is young adult fantasy. Lodestar, Nightfall, Flashback and Legacy are all middle grade fantasy by Shannon Messenger. Venom by Bex Hogan is young adult fantasy. Empire of Dreams by Ray Carson is young adult fantasy. Gods of Jade and Shadow by Sylvia Moreno Garcia is young adult fantasy. Heir of Fire by Sarah J. Maas is young adult or new adult fantasy. The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater is young adult fantasy. Bone Crier's Moon by Catherine Purdy is young adult fantasy. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins is young adult dystopian. Ninth House by Lee Bardugo is adult dark academia. Hungry Hearts by various authors is an anthology for young adults. The Queen of Blood by Sarah Beth Durst is young adult fantasy. House of Earth and Blood, otherwise known as Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas is adult urban fantasy. The Shadows, the Beast and the Chosen are adult paranormal romance by J.R. Ward. Cursed is an anthology by various authors and is also young adult. The Hate You Give and On the Come Up by Angie Thomas are both young adult contemporary. The King of Atolia by Megan Wallen Turner is young adult fantasy, epic fantasy. Incendiary by Zoraida Cordova is young adult fantasy. Slay by Brittany Morris is young adult science fiction, but told in a contemporary style, I believe. Summerbird Blue by Akemi Dawn Bowman is young adult contemporary. Rage of Dragons by Evan Winters is adult epic fantasy. The Court of Miracles by Kester Grant is a young adult retelling. Rose Interrupted by Patrice Lawrence is young adult contemporary. Girl Serpent Thorn by Melissa Bashadoost, which is young adult fantasy. A Song Below Water by Bethany Morrow is young adult fantasy. You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson is young adult contemporary. And then finally Rebirth by Christopher Russell, which is adult epic fantasy. And that's it. You can count those up if you want to. I'm not sure I want to. If I have braved it, I will put a little number on the screen and you'll be able to see. I will also have hated myself for having to insert pictures of every single one of these books as I went through them, but I managed it last time, so I'm sure I've managed it this time as well. And that's my physical TBR. Let me know what your physical TBR is like. Do you even have a physical TBR, or are you one of these magical people that doesn't have a physical TBR, in which case tell me all your secrets. And that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks. Bye.